Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So, I want to kind of talk about the series from a general standpoint because I haven't done any reviews for the books or anything like that, even though it's one of the series I really, really like. But most of my demographics, as far as my analytics shows, not a lot of people that are into like all middle grade kind of stories. So I haven't really bothered to do any reviews for middle grade stuff or YA stuff unless it's specifically Brandon Sanderson. But I kind of want to talk about this series, obviously, in light of the TV show coming up, because I think it's very, very influential. Not quite on the level of Harry Potter, but definitely right up there. And it is a very, very good series that integrates Greek mythology in this brilliant way. And I'm definitely going to do reviews for the episodes and have reactions up on Patreon. So, yeah, I kind of want to just talk about the series on a general level here today. So, yeah. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. All right, so Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I ran into this series like many, 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 many years ago, and I think it was around the time I had read the Pendragon series. I don't know. But I have always been a gigantic fan of Greek mythology. I am a huge fan of basically most cultural theologies and mythologies and stuff. But my very first one was Greek mythology. Like between the Hercules TV show in the 90s and the Xena TV show and the Disney's Hercules movie, I developed a near total obsession with Greek mythology. And the more I learned about it and, its actual context outside of TV shows like that, I kind of realized that it's very expansive and it's very sprawling. And like everything I learned about, there's more, there's like 100 things behind that one thing that I learned that there is to learn about and stuff. And I just really, really like grew to love it. And I think it also sparked my love of world building because the first little bit about Greek mythology I learned led to another thing, led to another thing, led to another thing. So it like just developed this real love of this sprawling type of world building, this lore that feels infinite and forever and endless. So I just really, really love that kind of stuff. So the Percy Jackson series was right up my alley, even though when I read the first book, I didn't really know it was going to do all that. And I just really, really appreciate it for that. So when I read the first book, I thought it was really, really fascinating. This integration of Greek mythology in its like purest form with this modern day, contemporary setting and stuff. So it plays with the idea that the Greek gods are always the center of Western civilization. So now the main hub of Western civilization is America. So they've migrated to America, and Mount Olympus is no longer on the mountain in Greece. It is above the Empire State Building. Essentially, it's just hovering above there, and like Hades is no longer in what was it, Mount Etna or somewhere like that, and now it's like in Hollywood and stuff. So I like the very common, almost cliche interpretation of these types of things, like City of Sin and all that kind of stuff, and New York just having all the cliches of superhero stuff and just all that other kind of stuff that like goes on in New York. So that makes a really good place for Mount Olympus to go. So I thought that stuff was just like a really cool kind of setup. It's this world, hidden world up under our own world kind of setup. I really like those types of stories, especially when it has this urban fantasy kind of feel to it. Even though I think this is still technically urban fantasy, even though it almost exclusively takes place inside the hidden world that it kind of is and stuff. But it plays on a lot of those kind of story type tropes of an urban fantasy, young adult or all middle grade book story, and it just kind of plays it through really nicely. Also, something that really struck me when I read the series was the way in which Rick Riordan will play on common mental, neurodivergencies in order to kind of play them up as benefits, because this was a time where you were neurodivergent in any sort of way, it was an immediate negative and you'd probably get bullied in schools and stuff like that. So this idea to use ADHD and dyslexia as a basically hidden superpower, because I think one of his children or something like that has both of those conditions, and he kind of wanted to, write a positive representation for it and stuff. So this idea that dyslexia is because like they're hardwired to read ancient Greek and not English and stuff. Like I like that interpretation. That's really cool. And the idea of the ADHD being like their battle, instincts and stuff like that. Like the reason why they're hyperactive and can't really sit still is because they're always ready for a fight because as a demigod, they're always going to have to fight. So I just like that kind of stuff, especially someone with ADHD. Like it's kind of a cool thing to have it reinterpreted in that way instead of just being called hyperactive like I was my entire life and all that kind of stuff. So I think that kind of stuff is just really, really good, especially for something that's a middle grade series that's targeted at younger children. So it'll kind of help give them like self confidence in a lot of ways, where things that they could be very insecure about, like you can kind of read from the perspective of it as a positive, and they can start to see the unique benefits that they have with these different mental capabilities essentially. Like people with ADHD and ADD are probably some of the only people that can successfully multitask and like not really drop the ball on too much, but like more successfully multitask than typical people. So like I think that's pretty cool. And I mean I'm not dyslexic, so I can't really speak to that at all. So I'm just gonna kind of leave that there. But I think what it does in terms of that stuff is just really, really good. I think Rick Riordan did a great job with it. And of course, like as I said, started off saying, the integration of the Greek mythology, the different Greek myths into the story just works so seamlessly. And the way in which he updates everything is just so much fun, and it makes it for a very contemporary feel. So instead of like the Greek gods having their typical looks and stuff, he describes like Poseidon as wearing like a fisherman shirt, and he has like that cliche like bowler fisher hat or whatever, and like his throne in Olympus is like one of the the fisherman chair that a lot of fishermen will have on their boats, like that swivel one that's almost like a computer chair kind of thing. Like he has that, and then the spot where they often keep the fishing pole, that's where he leaves his trident. So he just has this cliche like dad that goes fishing every Sunday kind of motif to him and stuff. And I just thought that aesthetic was just really, really cool. It's a really cool interpretation for Poseidon, and like it also carries through on pretty much all the characters. We don't get a lot of in-depth description of the way the other gods and stuff are, but like with characters like Zeus is almost a cliche. He's like a cliche business tycoon. He wears a suit and stuff, a pinstripe suit, and like nice shoes that are polished and stuff, and all that kind of stuff. So they kind of lean into different aspects of what their godhood would represent, and especially in modern day and stuff. So it makes for a very, very interesting kind of eclectic group of people. So like Mr. D, Dionysus, who runs the camp, he just kind of dressed like he just seemed to kind of dress very normally and casually and stuff, but they just play up the angle of him being the god of wine and stuff. And Rick Riordan manages to keep the series, very child centric by having the god that would be drunk all the time not being allowed to drink. So every time he makes some wine, Zeus will turn it into soda. Like, so he'll just be drinking soda and stuff instead of drinking wine. So I just like that interpretation of it and stuff, and kind of keeps down like all the madness and stuff. Because Dionysus as a god is like, if you dig into it, like he is pretty intense. But I just like the way in which a lot of that stuff is interpreted. And the way in which Rick Riordan kind of sets up the story, the framework and stuff of the story, it kind of plays exactly like Harry Potter. He's made it clear that he was inspired structurally by the Harry Potter series, because he had ideas for integrating Greek mythology and like this kind of a dynamic story, but he didn't really know how to set it up, like to give it the most opportunity for success. And then after the success of Harry Potter, he kind of saw the structure of it, like this trio dynamic and this kind of stuff, and going on quests and having each story be its kind of own individualized mission kind of thing. So he kind of seemed to have leaned into that. And I think it works so well because it works very much the way in which Greek stories are often told. Is very much like a quest. Like every time we learn a story that's centered around a person from Greek antiquity, especially in their stories, of course, they'll have, something will go on, and then they'll have to go to Hades and come back, or like have to go do the 12 labors, or like, anything like that. So it just, of course, it fits very well with the simplistic structure of the story he was trying to tell, and it just works perfectly with the subject matter being Greek mythology. So it plays on theme on multiple different levels. So it just works brilliantly. And then on top of that, so he has all these different kind of just like setup things that kind of are like just great ingredients for a story, but then he goes ahead and of course interject his like actual writing skill into it. So we get these really cool characters and with a lot of depth to them and interesting little nuances and foibles to them. And then he plays on these relationships that like will emphasize their different little unique traits and attributes and stuff. And then when they come together, it kind of just highlights them. So it's similar to like a lot of the dynamics that were attempted to be created with Harry Potter that I don't think worked as well. But this group in the Percy Jackson series like works a lot better. But he doesn't just also leave you with the main three that he creates, because in every book and every story he kind of switches up the cast. Like it'll always be our main trio, but he will add in like Tyson, like Percy's Cyclops brother, while Grover is in a separate location. So instead of being Annabeth, Percy, and Grover, it'll be Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson. Or then it'll be like other characters later down the line and stuff. They'll basically play swap out and swap a character for another character, add in another dynamic, and like just basically to keep it fresh, so it's not just the same three characters every time and stuff. So it's a really really fun setup in the way in which he does this stuff. And then by the time we get to the last book in the main series, he just kind of like just full blown goes full Greek mythology, and it feels as epic as one of those gigantic battles and stuff. All the creatures and dynamics and monsters and everything that he pulls directly from mythology like works so well at the end of the series and stuff. And it's just a really really well crafted series. It doesn't stay too long, it's not too short. It's just like all the character development is very very well done. You can tell that the story was planned from beginning to end, and it just really really works well. It's a great series for any middle grade reader. It's a good story for young adult readers, and it's a really great nostalgic story for any adult readers, like especially if you're still very much into Greek mythology and stuff, and you're not like so mature that you can't read about 12-year-olds and stuff like that. So I think the series really holds up, and I think it's a lot of fun. And I'm really happy that Rick Riordan didn't stop with the Greek mythology, because he almost immediately after this one wrote a trilogy called the Kane Chronicles, and it's the story about a brother and sister who find out they're descendants of Egyptian gods. And I love Egyptian mythology, so everything he does with the Egyptian pantheon and stuff in that series is really well done as well. Granted, the quest type of structure doesn't work as well in that one, because Egyptian mythology wasn't very much quest based. So there's a lot of dynamics in the way the stories play out there that's just, I don't think is as clean as Percy Jackson, but I think they're very very enjoyable, and I really do hope they get an adaptation as well, because there's some dynamics in that story that I think would work really well in this day and age, and it would be really 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 cool. So there's also a sequel series that continues with the Greek stuff. It's called it was Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and then the Lost Hero. What was that series called? The Heroes of Olympus, I think it was called. Yeah, it was Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Heroes of Olympus. So of course, Percy Jackson was popular enough that Rick Riordan kept writing within this kind of world. So it's essentially a sequel series that takes place mostly dealing with the Roman aspects of those same gods. So it's kind of interesting the way in which he plays with the Greek and Roman aspects going back and forth. And he kind of expands the understanding, because there's a lot of people that will like Greek mythology or like Roman mythology but don't really see the blending or the crossover. So the way in which he does a sequel series, like it really encapsulates and explains that dynamic in a really really cool way. And I think it expands on more myths and stuff that he didn't get to touch on in the first series. So he does a really 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 good job with it, and I think the story and the series and stuff still very much holds up to this day. And one of the more interesting things about Percy Jackson, at least in pop culture context, is that the books are very, very tied into the original movie adaptations. Of course they would be. But it's this weird kind of like back and forth dynamic, because it's not something like Dragon Ball Evolution or The Last Airbender, where their movie adaptations were so universally like hated. Like they're just so bad, the interpretations are bad, there's no room for redemption at all. But the Percy Jackson ones, there's a lot of interesting like nuance in there. They're not great interpretations, starting with the change in their ages and stuff. Even though I was okay with that because the age part in the prophecy, instead of it being ages 12 to 16, you could easily change it 16 to 20 and still have the prophecy still be technically correct. But there's just a lot of other like nuances and dynamics and like character interaction and characters in general that they just left out or ignored or did terribly. But what I find most interesting though is if you completely ignore the source material, if you ignore the book entirely and look at like the first Percy Jackson movie just as a generic movie that came out on its own, while still not a very good movie, like not made, very well in terms of a movie, it's very passable. It could be easily one of those sea level, just like throwaway kind of movies that came out, made a tiny splash, and then went away. The only reason this one continues is because it's tied so heavily to its source material. And it's like there's parts of it that's very accurate, but there's parts that are just terribly inaccurate. And it's the only adaptation series that I've seen where they actively try to correct their mistakes in the second one. The first Percy Jackson movie got a sequel, and they tried to adapt the second book. And they very much tried to like course correct and lean into a lot of the stuff from the books that they ignored, including like very pivotal world building elements and stuff. But the issue with that is they were pretty much confident that they weren't going to get to adapt any of the other books. So after they basically tried to course correct and get everything back on target with the book, they then just went very hard in a different direction and just tried to like stuff main parts from the last three books into just that second movie and just try to wrap up the entire story, which like just made it go down like the Hindenburg. It was just terrible. It was absolutely terrible. So anyone who's read the original books are very much looking forward to this Disney adaptation, even though there are some significant changes, like least of which being the race swap of Annabeth, because one of the biggest issues people had in the movie adaptation is that Annabeth was played by an actress who wasn't blonde and she did have gray eyes. Because a lot of the physical descriptions of the characters in the books are very specifically dependent on their godparent. So it kind of, their physical description is fairly important, even though a lot of those description points can easily be just changed and swapped out with the same logic reason. So like in the books, Percy is described as having sea green eyes and like dark black, like dark brown to black hair that's just always, basically his hair is described like Harry Potter hair was, like that unruly hair that won't ever like, go into a style or anything. Like it's very much that. But in the TV show adaptation, we have a young man who is mostly blonde. He's like brownish blonde, and has very curly hair instead of that straight, stick out everywhere hair. And he has very blue eyes instead of green eyes. But a lot of those dynamics you can obviously just transplant directly onto Poseidon and say those are still, characteristics and features. And like Annabeth, she had blonde hair and stormy gray eyes. So it was because Athena was described as being blonde and having those same eyes. So those are traits that were very specifically meant to be, the signifiers that she's the daughter of Athena. But like now they've cast a young lady who's black. So it's interesting. I wonder if they're just going to have like, she could just be a stand-in and like be biracial. Like still have her dad be a white guy and, her Athena be black, or Athena be white still, as a typical Greek and, be blonde or whatever, and then have her dad be black. But then it would take away because like she clearly doesn't have gray eyes or the blonde hair. So there's got to be something, just in general, keeping a physical marker of who their parent is. I would think the easiest thing to do would be to make Athena black, because we know that they've also made Zeus black, at least their incarnation in this interpretation, because it's not like they're black, they're still Greek. Well, they have no nationality because they're gods and they don't even have DNA, which is why the children can actually date each other and not worry about the fact that they're cousins. So all of that part is completely irrelevant. You can cast them however you want, but there's just like connections between the characters and stuff that I would like to, keep consistent. So like the fact that, I don't know what we're going to do later on because Lance Reddick has sadly passed, but Lance Reddick was cast as Zeus. So I guess Thalia will at least be biracial. So, or since gods have no DNA, it technically doesn't matter. Like, I don't know how they're going to play it. Probably for the people who haven't read the books and don't know those nuanced details, they'll probably just keep it straightforward. But yeah, I'm interested to see the changes. I know there's multiple changes they'll have to make because even the comic book adaptation, the graphic audio, or not graphic audio, the graphic novel adaptation of the first book, like takes out some of the missions that I miss. Like there's a scene where they go and deal with this very obscure Greek monster named Procrustes, and it seems like they're not doing that in the book because they also didn't do that in the graphic novel. And there's a couple other instances that like because the quest they go on is really just like a who's who of Greek mythology. So there's a number of people they run into during their quest that they take out of the graphic novel adaptation. So I imagine they're doing the exact same thing in the show, and they're taking some of those different interactions out because you can still keep the quest and the mission exactly the same. Just take out some of their their pit stops basically. So I've been talking about this for a while, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up. I really do like the Percy Jackson series. I like the sequel series. I haven't read like Magnus Chase or any of the other various spinoffs Riordan has written like from Percy Jackson or anything, but I do still like that original series, and I can't wait for the TV show. I will be doing reaction episodes over on Patreon as well as an after show kind of quick review. But for the main channel, I'll be doing just kind of regular general reviews for each episode. So if you want to check out the reactions and stuff like that, you can check out the Patreon. The link is in the description. So as always, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I will talk to you all next time. Peace.